Today we're looking at the Barefoot Sound Footprint03 monitor. Now this is the least expensive and the most compact monitor the Barefoot Sound has ever created. They've also brought some new technology to bear here, and of course they've included all that Barefoot goodness in this monitor as well. They sound absolutely fantastic. So let's take a tour and check out what these are all about. So despite its compact size, this is actually a three-way monitor. We've got a 6.5-inch woofer, that's an aluminum cone woofer. We've also got an aluminum cone 3.5-inch mid-range driver. And then we've got Barefoot's proprietary high-frequency driver as well, that dual ring design. Now all this is driven by a total of 260 watts of power and offers frequency response from 45 Hertz to 40 kilohertz. Now one of the interesting things about this is also the first ported cabinet that's come from Barefoot Sound. It's actually a side-facing port, and in a little bit we'll take a look inside the cabinet so you can see just how that's working, because there can be some compromises when you introduce a port into a sealed cabinet like this. And what Thomas Barefoot has done is very carefully worked with the port itself, with the port tube, as well as some DSP inside the cabinet to maximize the low frequency response. As that low frequency woofer tapers off and its low frequency response, the port actually comes up. And it's also a matter of then also balancing that against the transient response. And the transient response with these monitors is fantastic. It's all about that Barefoot design ethos of making the monitor as good as it can possibly be from an acoustic and mechanical standpoint, and then really optimizing that using DSP. And that brings us to some of the new technologies that are inside this monitor. First of all, we have that port design, and again, we'll be taking a look inside the cabinet at that. But one of the other important changes here is that Thomas Barefoot has incorporated what he calls SPOC, which is Spectrally Optimized Conversion. So basically what they've done is, as opposed to taking the full frequency range and running it into an A to D converter, they've realized that the low frequencies, of course, take much more energy. They're a much longer wavelength. There's a lot more power there than there is in the mid and the high frequencies. And typically what happens is you have to attenuate that signal as it goes into the converter, and because those low frequencies are so much more powerful, you're converting the high and the mid frequencies more than they need to be. So with SPOC, they're actually using an analog crossover in front of the converter. In fact, there are two converters. So the low frequencies run through the crossover, they're routed so that they can be attenuated, and then they're sent into their own converter. The mid and the high frequencies go through the crossover, but they're not attenuated at all. So that means they're coming through with higher resolution on the other converter. Now, according to Barefoot, this gives us the equivalent of about 5 bits more resolution, or about 15 dB increase in signal-to-noise ratio. So a substantial increase, and it really works to improve the clarity of the signal, particularly in the mids and the highs. So it's really optimized for the different frequency ranges when it comes to the conversion. Very cool idea. Another technology that's incorporated into these monitors is also found in other Barefoot monitors, and that's their MEME technology. And what this does is allow you to switch among different monitor emulations. So there's a flat response setting, there is a white cone speaker setting, and there's a mixed cube setting, and then there's also a hi-fi or consumer speaker setting. Now the interesting thing here is that you're not just changing, say, an EQ to emulate those monitors. Barefoot is actually going in and using DSP to recreate some of the phase things, some of the different aspects of the response of those other speakers inside this, so you get a much more accurate emulation of the speaker that they're trying to recreate. And this allows you to basically have 4 references inside of one cabinet. Just switch to the one you want to work on. Normally you'd work on flat, but if you want to check your references on some of these other types of speakers, very easy to do using MEME. So let's talk a little bit more about the drivers that are inside this, because they're unique as well. As I mentioned, this is a 6.5-inch aluminum cone woofer. The fact that it's aluminum cone means that we have greater rigidity and less resonance in the cone itself. It's also a long excursion driver, and this means we have less compression and more potential volume output from that driver. Now those same characteristics apply to the aluminum cone mid-range driver over here. That's a 3.5-inch mid-range driver. Again, we've got long excursion, so we get less compression and more volume from that driver, and because it's an aluminum cone, more rigid, less resonance. On the high frequency, we have that dual ring design with the aluminum phase plug in the center, and that really helps to broaden the sweet spot and eliminate any possible distortions and things that happen because of the design of the tweeter. It allows for much more detail at the top end. The high frequency driver is driven by 60 watts of power. The low and the mid each have their own 100 watt power amplifier, so we have a total of 260 watts of power here, and this gives us up to 101 dB SPL potential from this monitor. Now it doesn't stop there. Thomas Barefoot also took a close look at the cabinet, as he always does when he's designing his monitors. It may look like a standard box, but actually it's quite heavy. It's about 18 pounds for a monitor of this size. That's pretty substantial. There's also been a lot of work done to make this cabinet as inert as possible. It's very thick MDF design. There's extensive bracing in there. There's bracing behind the woofer to help eliminate resonances. And it's also coated in that trademark Barefoot textured polyester finish, which helps to damp the entire thing. We've got a solid aluminum baffle here around the tweeter, as well as the mid-range driver. And Barefoot has used what they call their stress assembly techniques, which again help to minimize those resonances, make sure that cabinet's as absolutely inert as possible. So what does all this mean? Basically, it translates to a monitor that performs extremely well. You'll be surprised at how much bottom end comes out of this monitor, the low frequency extension, as well as the amount of volume you can get while maintaining that clarity. We've also got excellent imaging, and I'd point to that dual ring tweeter as part of that, but also the clarity that you get having a dedicated 3.5-inch mid-range driver as well. That long excursion means there's less compression, they're more dynamic. You're going to get a very accurate picture of your mixes and your tracks, and you're also going to get a good idea of the depth of your mixes and your tracks, and how you're applying effects, reverbs, those kind of things are going to be very easy to mix using these. So as long as we're talking about the cabinet, let's take a look inside these speakers. We'll be able to see some of those construction details, as well as take a look at how that port's set up. Now, Barefoot Sound was kind enough to send over this cutaway of an actual Footprint03. They were using this as a display at the NAMM show, and we asked them if they'd bring it in here to Sweetwater, and it really tells a lot about the story of what's going on inside this cabinet. You can see how thick, how heavy the actual construction of the cabinet itself is. What's a little harder to see is the amount of damping material that's actually inside here. There's quite a bit of it inside the actual cabinet, but the important thing is that port, which actually the hole is up here on the side of the cabinet, extends all the way back down over here, and it's also widely flared on both ends. Now that wide flare reduces the velocity of the air that's going through there, so you don't get turbulence noise, you don't get wind noise or air noise as the low frequencies are coming out of that port. The length of that port is designed to maximize the low frequency response. So again, as that woofer tapers off in its frequency response, the resonance point of that port starts to come up. It evens out the low frequencies and extends them even lower than the woofer could do on its own. But part of that is also doing that without affecting the transient response. So again, the length of that tube is very important, both in ensuring that the resonant point is at the correct frequency, that you're tailoring it with the woofer properly, and that you're not impacting that transient response. Then once that's all as good as you can make it from an acoustic design or a mechanical design standpoint, then the DSP comes into play to ensure that you're getting the best possible response on those low frequencies inside this cabinet. Because that's a very compact cabinet to get down to 45 hertz, have solid bottom end out of it like that, and yet still have that great transient response. One other aspect of the cabinet that we should mention is we've got an aluminum backplate on these monitors as well. And part of that is there's actually a mount that's integral here, a VESA mount, that allows you to very easily put these speakers up if you're creating an immersive audio system, for example. So they're great if you want to do those type of mixing setups with multiple speakers arrayed around you. Now, I've had this set of Footprint03s in my office studio here for a little over a month, maybe 6 weeks at this point. I've been listening to them a lot, and I really enjoy these monitors. They present a very accurate picture of what's going on. They're not fatiguing. They're very clear. I really enjoy the imaging. I found them to be very easy to mix on as well. So if you're looking for a monitor that can provide excellent low frequency extension, great mid-range clarity, plenty of detail on top, plenty of output for a reasonable sized room or reasonable volume level, lots of headroom, and great dynamics, I highly recommend checking these out. As a bonus, they're very compact for the performance these monitors offer, and they're also the least expensive monitors that Barefoot Sound has ever offered. Really recommend taking a look at these. They make a great choice, whether as your primary monitor or as a second monitor in a studio with main monitors. If you want to learn more about the Barefoot Footprint03, any of the Footprint monitors, or any of Barefoot Sound's products, head on over to Sweetwater.com, or better yet, contact your Sweetwater sales engineer for full information. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater.